producer, his brother Aaron. You guys applauded. And then I'm so thrilled and so honored to have Amy Nicholson. Karyn Kuasama. Before I move over to you, John, I just want to say something. I want to say that, I'm sorry? Is it on? Yeah, it is on.
Okay.
You guys can hear me, right?
Great.
I'm not just projecting. Right? Okay. I don't say it enough, but I gotta say what an incredible honor it is for me to get to pick the brains of people like you and to get to experience film through your eyes, through your lens, through your perspectives. For me, this is the joy of it. And the joy of cinema, period, is to get to not just say, film is this, or this film means this. It's to get to talk to your friends, talk to people who know about film, people who may not even know about film, but just try to experience it from the different perspectives. And so when you get to do it with people like you guys, wow, I will never get tired of this, and I hope I get to do this for the next 50 years. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Alexandre. I know I speak for all of us in saying thank you for creating such an intriguing and imaginative project. There is an apocryphal story about Frank Baum that when he used to be in his living room telling stories to little children about this magical place, one of the little boys raised his hand and he said, "Mr. Baum, what is this place called?" And Bob had never thought of that before, and he looked around and he was trying to come up with something, and he saw his file cabinet and it said A through F, no, that's nothing. G through, he kept going down until he got to the bottom shelf, and it said O through Z, Oz. That, in many ways, is the origin of the land of Oz. What was the origin of this project?
You know, it's interesting because the serendipity of those moments is it serendipity, is it fate? We can go around and round. And actually, those are kind of ideas that I like to really explore as well, because this idea of, are there any sort of real coincidences to a certain extent? This one I don't have a distinct memory. I rarely have distinct memories of this is the moment where I went like, oh, this is the film that I want to make. But obviously, Lynch has been transformative for me. Lost Highway, when I went to see it in the movie theater, just completely, I walked in as a fan and I walked out as a super fan at that point. I mean, that movie just, completely changed me. Oz, I have a different relationship because I grew up in Switzerland, and in Europe, you don't really watch The Wizard of Oz. It's just not a thing. I can't remember, we were talking about this in the lobby, I can't think of a time in Europe when I actually saw The Wizard of Oz on television. My mother didn't know about The Wizard of Oz until we made this film. And so she went to get the DVD and watched it. She was like, "Oh, it's really good. Yeah. It's really good." So I was like in my 20s when I discovered it for the first time, and it was just, blew my mind. Obviously watched it a bunch of times. So, but I'm very interested in culture. I'm very interested in these moments in cinema that mean something, and I'm passionate about American culture. And so clearly, at one point, I had to get into Lynch and I had to get into Oz. And so, because Lynch fans, of which you can tell there's a few here in this house, I've been talking about the connections, the possible connections, obviously way beyond Wild at Heart, which is, I think, the least Ozian of all of his films. But I thought, we have to go down this rabbit hole. We have to open that door and see where it leads us. And and then it led me to these incredible people. And obviously, David and I, David will tell you a lot about the process as well. And this is what we have. Ultimately, this is a film really, I think, fundamentally about the mysteries of influence and inspiration of the creative process. That's what Lynch is about.
let's move into that process a bit. So this question is for David and Aaron. David is the editor. I look at the credits roll in the thousands, seemingly, of clips, that are a part of this. How in the world do you begin to construct a linear idea that we can somehow process out of all this footage? And Aaron, same question. In scoring this film, how do you help us emotionally go on a journey, especially when there's a lot of diegetic music already a part of so many of these clips?
Yeah, there's a lot of work. I guess this project to me is sort of blended with like my COVID brain. Because we embarked on it right at the very beginning of COVID, and I don't know that it would have been so easy to plunge myself into if it wasn't, lockdown and quarantine. But what you see up there, each one of those clips and those credits is the result of a research project, and we broke it down sentence by sentence is the only way to, you eat a big thing one bite at a time, kind of an idea. And Alexandre and I worked together before, and we talk almost every day whether we're working on a project or not, and it was just a joy to mostly to dive into
Thank
those
you.
things. So, I guess, yeah, there's like about 200 different sources, and like one of them is Twin Peaks. That's a lot of hours for like one source, so there's a lot.
Aaron, how about you?
Well, for me, this project, like David was saying, was a project about being creative and making something within these limitations. It was COVID, you couldn't do these, like on-camera interviews, and that was his thing. But for me, when I was first talking to Alexandre about doing this, he initially said, I want an only guitar score. And that's what we did. And so that was a limitation. What you were saying, the diegetic music, that was another kind of line to the box that I had to draw within, but that in a way is very liberating. That's, like the beats that I had to hit. And the other part of your question was, how did I craft it, like the emotional journey throughout it? And I was listening to, these great interviews and, all of your great insights into Lynch and Oz, and just trying to follow that, whether it's the tragedy of Judy Garland's life story and, the personal falling apart of that, or, the sort of angelic ambience of a Lynchian, like that side of it. It was really about channeling the Lynch and Badalamenti sound into this with all of these other constraints, and following the journey.
Let's go to Amy. Amy, your section of the film, you talk about wind, and I had never really noticed that those voices, those human voices that do sound like wind, in the way that begins this journey for the audience through this story. There's something about wind that it's invisible. We don't see it. We can feel it. We can have a sense that it's there. What else do you see in the work of David Lynch and in The Wizard of Oz that is maybe not there, but is so strong moving through the subtext and is powered by that wind?
Yeah, I mean, wind is everything in The Wizard of Oz. There is no story in The Wizard of Oz without wind. And then to realize that wind was the word that David Lynch uses to his actors. More wind, more wind, more wind is the source of something indescribable. Power, mystery, magic. It means so much to him. And it's so strange, you say the word wind, and I have no idea exactly what he means by it, but I feel like I do know exactly what he means by it. For me as a critic, I feel like what I'm always looking out for in movies is moments where you see the fingerprint of the creators, where you see the humanity underneath the film. And so when I noticed something it took me thousands of watches of Wizard of Oz. I'm American. I grew up with this movie. I've seen this movie a million times. I can't even quite fathom. We were talking about this aside. I can't fathom that a continent of people has not watched this movie. That's not in DNA. That's not like, to me, this is like the American equivalent of like the Bible on cinema. You know, just like the touchstone. And so yeah, when on like my 1000th watch, when I heard the human voices in that wind, I just thought I loved picturing that moment on the lot, that moment of all the coral people they hide, the people that buy that under contract, and just that little extra human touch for no reason. I don't know why they would do that, and that's, to me, it links into the whole mystery and magic of what makes a movie worth revisiting when you see something new in it every single time.
Karyn, I in your section, I couldn't help but think about, you know, what you were saying with Mulholland Drive, and thinking about some of the stories you've been a part of crafting even recently. I kept thinking, wow, in some ways, Yellow Jackets is this little group of Dorothys that we're going on this journey. You know, as someone who not only observes The Wizard of Oz and observes these type of journeys, how do you see that playing out in your own work? How do you see these influences coming into the way that you direct stories?
I mean, I think for me personally, I'm interested by the stories of finding embodiment, like the idea that we enter and live in our own body in a present way. And I think, you know, Wizard of Oz, the entire Lynch canon is sort of enduring because of the fact that we're watching a person struggle with their presence. They're asking, like, am I here? Is this happening? What is happening? Can I escape? Am I a prisoner to myself, to my own life? And I think those questions are so profound and simple, and definitely something I hope to explore. Although I have to just say, in a shout out to the filmmakers, I just feel like this kind of film is so humbling to be reminded of just like the enduring power of cinema and the enduring power of storytelling, and the hope, the optimism that comes from telling visual stories. It really is truly moving, Alexandre. Thank you.
Rodney, you as a filmmaker yourself, you know, have explored many of these ideas about the darkness and the light. And we hear you talk in your section of the film about Mulholland Drive, you know, as well. And I wonder, what is it about these darker experiences of the human journey that seem to draw you?
Well, I mean, I guess I would just say, and it's funny because it's been, you know, a fair amount of time since I recorded this, that watching it again, I hear myself saying things that I've forgotten that I've said, and thoughts that I forgot that I had. And sometimes I say, oh, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. And other times I cringe and wish that, you know, I had a chance to take some of it back. But there was a moment, you know, where I think I was talking about the fact that this stuff resonates because, you know, we're all going through something similar, right? And when I've done, you know, projects where people are talking about, you know, their journeys to understand film, or the way they've been influenced, or the way that film helped them understand the world, whenever it gets personal is when it starts to get more interesting to me. And, you know, I think one of the, you know, one of the most amazing things about, you know, really powerful film is that it allows you to either, you know, sort of vicariously experience something, you know, that you're not ready to do in real life, or it sort of gives you a language to talk about, you know, some of the things that are difficult to talk about in your own life.
I must say, I will be thinking about your story of the cat in the bird language for some time. That was,
It was so weird, because she doesn't, well, rest in peace, Sheena, but she didn't watch a lot of TV. It would just be abstract colors and lights and shapes, but 3 things that she watched were episode 8 of season 3 of Twin Peaks, The White Buffalo with Charles Bronson, and 3 Women. I think there was something about like the scenes where Shelley Duvall was like doing those water exercises in those shallow pools. Just the mesmerizing motion of the people's forms going through the water that kind of hypnotized.
Thanks. Alexander, you've spent a lot of your career unpacking and exploring the American myth, and this comes up in David Lowery's section of the film. And you seem to, as someone who was raised outside the culture of America, but very much in touch with the culture of America, growing up with it from a different country through a different lens. What is it that you have discovered about the American myth through the films that you've made?
Oh boy, that's a loaded question. Well, it's a loaded question because I'm Swiss, I'm French, and I'm American. Okay, so it's and I grew up in Switzerland, dreaming of America, but dreaming of America through American movies. You know, I mean, there's this other film that actually is coming out called The Taking, which we talked about, and your voice is in it. Which is about the semiotics of Monument Valley, and specifically the John Ford Monument Valley Westerns, right? And so I was talking about the fact that as a kid, I was watching a lot of Westerns, and when I was dreaming about America, the shapes of Monument Valley immediately came to mind, and then coming to realize that this is actually something that is quite common in Europe, that, you know, Westerns are hugely popular, and people, when they think about America, the myth of the West, the myth of America, or the idea of America, they think about Monument Valley. It's a weird thing, right? So, you know, but I grew up, it's complicated. So, you know, when I was a kid, so my best friend was Sophia Loren's son, Eduardo. I spent a lot of time watching movies at Sophia Loren's place, which is a weird thing. And he would import these VHS. He was a huge horror buff. I mean, like, clearly he had an impact on me. He would import these like VHS tapes that we couldn't get in Switzerland, of all these horror films that, you know, and we would just like play them and just like pause and stop and rewind and try and figure out how things were done. So it's talk about DNA. Like, I think American cinema, and not that I wasn't watching, you know, French films or other foreign films, but for me, it was this coupling of the idea of America, of wanting to come here, and eventually coming here, obviously, and then watching those films that made me want to come here. You know, there's this idea that, you know, America is cool, right? I mean, and it still is true. You know, it's as complicated as we are as a nation, and I can now say we as an American as well. You know, and I go abroad. Obviously, I travel a lot, and I go back to Europe very, very frequently. But it's still there. You know, and I think a lot of that is the movies, is Hollywood movies, and so I can't say enough. You know, how happy it makes me to see this. You know, this communal experience. Because obviously a lot of the films that I make are about the communal experience, the movies that move us collectively, the collective psyche, the collective dreams. I mean, that's what movies are. And so the fact that we're all back here, and obviously a huge shout out to Vidiots. I mean, you guys need to come here.
I'm going to pose a question, and I would love to hear both Karyn and Amy reflect on this. What can we learn, or what can we take from movies about movies? In other words, what do we gain by looking at how we absorb stories through this cinematic medium?
I mean, my initial instinct is just to say that all movies are about movies. So, you know, like, thinking about the idea of the project of Lynch Oz. You know, one of the first movies I ever saw in a theater other than Fantasia was David Lynch's Eraserhead. And so, how has that forever mutated my brain cells as a child into something that would have been different had it been Lassie? And so I think, I guess to me, I think like all of the image making we make and all of the image making we consume is feeding us and starving us, you could argue, of all kinds of culture and ideas and emotional life. But I don't know, I guess that's all I have to say.
I mean, for me, in a way, the process of making this movie has reminded me that movie going is just an active experience that you do your entire life. And it made me think about the act of revisiting films, especially David Lynch. I'm like nervous to say this in a room of Lynchian fans. I did not like David Lynch for a very, very long time because I came about it wrong. My first David Lynch movie I ever watched was Lost Highway, but with no context of who he was and what he was. I just thought Spaghetti was cute. And I saw that movie, and then nobody to talk about it with, and just being a teenager was like, he's making fun of me. Because I couldn't understand why people would act like that, or move like that, or talk like that. I didn't know anything about it. And so, learning to love Lynch came about as a process, an active choice, where it was actually going back to Eraserhead and seeing the human who made that film and everything he was scared of made me love him in Eraserhead, and then moving forward. But the act, I guess, of being an audience member, learning to expand, because it's so easy to see something and be like, I hate it, it's stupid, it's not for me, everybody's got an opinion. You close a lot of doors in this life, and learning to love Lynch as an active process has made me really value open doors and watching Lost Highway again and again, and really coming to understand the power that it has. So that's what keeps me going to the movies every day, you know, that's what I love about them.
Gonna be asking David and Aaron to reflect on a question as well, but after they've answered, we will have time to come out to the audience for just one or two questions. So be thinking if there's something that you'd like to ask someone on the panel. In the meantime, David and Aaron, as co-creators in this project with Alexandre, how do you think about approaching properties as large as The Wizard of Oz and David Lynch? I would crawl under my bed, afraid to even touch their work, but yet somehow you were okay to edit that work and to bring music to that work. How do you go about that in a way that you can still sleep at night?
Well, I guess I think, you know, the responsibility in the eyes of like the public of being the custodian of these properties, but it really falls on Alexandre's shoulders. And so, you know, it's a collaborative effort, but I mean, growing up, David Lynch was a pantheon director for me, especially. I feel, I didn't grow up with The Wizard of Oz as like a very important film, but I know it is for like so many people, so you know, there's that sense of responsibility, but really, it was an excitement feeling to get to play with the world of David Lynch and kind of showcase it in ways that are like, I wanted, you know, we wanted to find the clips that we think are coolest and try to, you know, turn people on to like what we think is cool about David Lynch and what everyone is saying about David Lynch and just try to illuminate it. So, you know, you just can't think about that stuff too much, really gotta push it down.
Well, first of all, I don't have a conscience. But no, seriously, I think you were alluding to it really at the end of what you were saying is and Alexandre, in the introduction, you really hit the nail on the head. It's the movie's not about cracking the Lynch code. It's not about answers. It's about being thought-provoking and lasting with you when you rewatch these movies, or if you see these movies for the first time after seeing this movie. So to me, it was always about adding, not even adding to the conversation, but facilitating a conversation, you know, and adding to the larger cinephile universe, I guess.
Thank you. We'll come to the audience for a couple of questions, and then we'll give Alexandre the last word before we leave. Yes?
Hi, congratulations, everybody. Such a dream. My question is to the filmmaker and the filmmakers about the construction. Was it, because it seems to me there would have to be a portion of it that would necessarily be the prose essay, the thinking on the general concept of Oz and Lynch, but then also you, Alexandre, or all of you must have had such clear ideas about, aside from the Lynch clips, you must have had clear ideas, and the Oz clips, you must have had clear ideas about the other peripheral references outside of those two, which, and was there voice first, was there?
Yeah, you're asking about
montage
the
first?
process. So, yeah, so it's a multi-step. You know, the first thing that informed the way that this film was made and structured was COVID. We started in 2020, March 2020, and literally as things started shutting down left and right. So there wasn't the luxury to go and interview people face to face. So I thought, first of all, you know, step number one was for me was to recruit people who were willing to go all in. So literally, I mean, I think I pretty much told all you guys, like, Lynch Oz, are you in? Yes. You know, it wasn't like I didn't have to sort of present a paper or an essay, right? So, the first part was to, and obviously there are different reasons why I went after them, but I also couldn't go after, say, 15 people at once, which I would have done for 1752, the Shower Scene Dog, or any of the other films that I've made, because I wanted to give each one the space to really come up with a thesis. And then eventually the job was to make sure that those theses were going to work together to build a larger narrative. So that was you know, the problem or the difficulty. But once they were in, and I went one by one, serendipitously, Amy, you were the first one. And you ended up being chapter one. But that was not the way that I necessarily had, you know, envisioned it, but it made sense, you know, that your chapter, I think, so beautifully anchors, you know, sort of roots the project into the significance, the cultural significance of the Wizard of Oz, and the main connections really with Lynch. It's a very welcoming way to get people into the film. And then of course Rodney shows up and he just pulls the rug from beneath your feet. And by the end of his chapter, you don't even know what's real and what's not, which is what I love about it. But so we had, you know, first an interview over the phone. The shortest one was about 90 minutes. The longest one was about 3.5 hours. That was Aaron and Justin. It's what I call a jazz interview. You know, we were riffing, and you know, my job really is to pay attention to where they want to take me. And as they're taking me down these various paths, to try and get sort of wrap my head around what their thesis is going to be. And so ultimately I felt like, okay, there's enough there, you know, we hang up, transcribe the interview, and then come up with a draft of something that I think this is it. So I sent it to them, we went back and forth a few times, you know, occasionally I would make a suggestion about, hey, how about we have this or that, you know, it depends on who it was. But in the process of drafting this, and I have to say this too, there's this other consideration, which is fair use. This is a 100% fair use film, by the way.
Oh.
100%. Yeah, so we work with Donaldson, Caliph, Perez. You know, they're the gold standard for fair use, and as you can imagine, it's not an easy film to make on this level. So in the early stage of drafting, you know, the scripts, it was also thinking about, you know, each sentence, is there a defensible way to illustrate this or to do this transformationally, or whatever tenets of fair use we're going to use. I had to at least have a blueprint in my head, before I sent these guys back to the recording studio, which is ultimately what we did, and then they re-recorded their voice, and that's what you have in the film. And then the real work began. It's totally interesting, right? And then the real work began with David and I. And David, I mean, you know, as he said, we geeked out a lot, and obviously I had some ideas for clips, but you know, David obviously brought so much to the table, and we, as he said, we went sentence by sentence, moment by moment. We auditioned multiple clips because it's not about just making sure that we illustrate a moment, but making sure that each clip tells the deeper story about influence and inspiration and resonates on multiple levels throughout the film. So, you know, it's a process. And then we have to deal with the attorneys. You know, which is a whole other thing, and then sometimes there's clips that we can't use, and you know,
I've been there.
yeah, you've been there. So, you know, but you know, the philosophy though with David, and I was very clear on this, is that when I said, you know, we're gonna wait for the attorneys to come back, we know that there are certain clips we're not gonna be able to use. And I said, David, let's not be down on this. If we can't have this, that means that there's a better solution out there. There's something we haven't thought of, and it's going to be better. And sure enough, there were a number of clips we couldn't use. And like what? I don't know. Do you remember? Which clips we couldn't use?
The Mr. Rogers thing, they wouldn't let us use.
Oh yeah, there was Mr. Rogers meeting
Margaret Hamilton.
Margaret Hamilton.
That reminds me, that notion that the reason that those shots got rejected was because there was a better alternative. Reminds me of, I think, my favorite behind the scenes David Lynch story, where he was filming some scene, and every time a character said a line, there would be like a fuse would get blown and the light would go out. And they did it again and again and again, and the light kept breaking, the light kept, and the fuse kept popping, until he stopped and he looked at the script and he changed a line, and then the power stayed on.
I think we may have time for one more question. Yeah.
Speaking of influences, like I can't help but imagine that this movie was influenced by Rodney's Room 237. If you guys have seen that. Is that true or no? No.
No, I mean, sorry, I mean,
there are not a lot of like kind of documentary movies where you have interviews but you don't see the person, and that's the only other one I can think of. Like,
I mean,
There's
not
Los
probably
Angeles,
influence.
there's Los Angeles Plays Itself,
Yeah.
which is all, that's all voice of, thank you, by the way. But there are precedents, including, you know, George Lucas, People Against George Lucas, who've been doing this longer than I have.
Well, yeah, but I think he's talking specifically about
The voiceover,
voices,
yeah.
and, you know.
and you know different you know, like a fractalization, I guess, or whatever. Like,
I mean, you know, it's interesting because I again, like there's I mean, every time you make a film, there's a lot of conscious stuff, there's a lot of stuff that's not, you know. Did Room 237 sort of influence me without thinking about it? Probably. I mean, obviously, I called Rodney at one point, so I'm sure, but you know, like consciously, no. It's not something that sort of came to mind, but now that you're saying it, you know, there might be something to it.
Only that
Yeah, it's all, I mean, we're one big family, you know. I mean, that's really what it is, you know, but man, his movies, so good, so good. Mention The Matrix, come on, I mean, like, honestly, like, if you guys haven't seen it, you really should.
Maybe, since that was a quick answer, maybe one more question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about the interplay between the composition and the edit. If you'd be willing to touch on that a little bit.
Sure. By composition, you mean
Like the
music?
score.
Yeah.
Sure, I mean, it was, like I was alluding to earlier, I was using the diegetic music from the clips, from the edit, and how they crafted the visual flow of the movie as sort of anchor points, you know, like places to end, so that would inform, you know, where I needed to end it or where I needed to start it. You know, it kind of was that target at either side of it. Was there a more specific element that you were curious about?
I suppose perhaps the relationship between you and the team of editors, it seemed like there was the main editor, David, but I'm sure everybody had some sort of say in the way that the clips were all crafted together. I guess I'd just love to know, was there a back and forth between some of the musical choices that you did, or were you like given a final film and then told to play the guitar over this?
Oh no. No, I came on fairly early in the process. I think there still had to be some interviews done, and you know, it wasn't totally put together. And then, like they were saying, the whole legal review, things kind of shifted around a little bit. But it ended up being parts of the score I needed to embrace that sort of collage editing kind of style, and you know, make it work with the legal changes that needed to be made and the other narrative choices that they were making. And it was a little bit of a grab bag of everything. You know, some stuff stayed the same, and then some stuff was a little more in flux. Yeah.
Well, we're gonna give the last word to Alexandre here. Alexandre, a question for you to kind of close us out on, is we all get ready to go home today.
Yes.
As a mythologist, I love the mythological theme of just returning home. From Odysseus in the Odyssey to E.T. just trying to get back home. Just trying to get back home, one of the greatest mythological themes. What is it that draws us about that theme and that we all resonate with about just trying to get back home?
Well, I mean, you know, that's also a loaded question for me because I travel a lot. I'm very nomadic, and my home technically is in Denver, but I'm never there. And I spent more time. To me, home is a feeling, and it's a feeling, and it's people. It's, you know, to sound corny, but it's where the heart is. And you know, I feel like for me it's a little bit fragmented. Home, you know, here it feels like home in some ways. I mean, I've spent quite a bit of time in San Diego, spent quite a bit of time in Monterey, spent quite a bit of time up in the Pacific Northwest, and then I spent quite a bit of time at film festivals around the world. But I am struggling with the idea of home, of this feeling of, you know, being rooted in one place, and I long for it, and I long for it because I think it's a very human longing. We want to belong someplace, and I haven't figured it out yet. So eventually I will. I'm hoping.
Let's thank Vidiots, Janus Films.